Today we're going to start talking about lists. And basically what lists are a collection of values that you're storing. So a list is kind of like a box that you can put a lot of things in. And it's a sequence of values, just like strings was a sequence of characters. So we're going to see that there are a lot of similarities when we're talking about lists with strings. So a lot of the things that we were able to do with strings, we're going to be able to also do with lists. So basically a list is a collection of values that you can store together. Every object that you put in a list, we call that an item or an element. And the nice thing about lists in Python is that the values in the list don't all have to be the same type. So other languages, they require that objects in a list all be like numbers or strings or characters. With Python, it's not required. So I can have a list that contains a number and a string and a character and a Boolean. I can have any kind of objects in there. Now, there are a few differences between a list and a string. When we talked about strings, we said strings are immutable. We cannot really change the content of a string just by calling a method on it or a function on it. We had to reassign the string. But lists are mutable. I can actually go to a list and add more items and delete items and figure out what's in there. So how do we create a list? We think of a name, a variable name, and then we say equal, and we use the square brackets to list our items. Have we seen this before? Yes, we have. We've seen it with the for. With the for loop, when I have a for loop, I was saying like for I in, and then I was giving it a list. So we were kind of using a list without really digging in and learning a lot about lists. And so here, if I create fruits equal, and I set 3 things in the list, and then I ask it to print fruits, it's going to print for me apples, oranges, and grapes. If I have a list here, I have a list prices that has numbers in it. I can have a list that has a mix of things. It has a string and 2 numbers. And so the print function can print the contents of the list. If you just say print and the name of the list, you will get the contents of the list printed out. You will get them with the square brackets and the commas in between. Now, what can I do with a list? I can change values. So what I want to do is compare lists and strings. So we're going to go to mu, and whatever we're doing with lists, we're going to do with strings too, so we can see the similarities and differences between strings and lists. So the first thing is when I'm creating a string, let's say name, we would just put it inside single quotes or double quotes. Okay, with a list, we have to put them in square brackets like apples, for example, and 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this is how you create a name, a string, and a list. Now we said strings are immutable. So I couldn't go to name and say I want to set 0 equal to, the letter L, for example. If I come and I say print me name again, I will see that name hasn't changed. Oops, actually it won't let you. It doesn't even let you do that because it says string object does not support item assignment. You can't assign a value. So this actually doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Because strings are immutable. So here, strings are immutable. I cannot mutate them. I cannot change them. But lists are. So I can go to my list and access by location, like say location 0, and I'm going to change location 0 to be, instead of apples, I'm going to make it banana. And so now if I print my list, I will see that it now has banana in it instead of 1, 2, 3. Okay, now I do see that it's a list inside, and that's because I made it by mistake a list. So let's fix that. I want it to be the item banana. So let's fix that. And now it contains banana, the string. So lists can also be inside lists, but we're going to talk about that later. So that's one difference between strings and lists. Strings are immutable, but lists are mutable. We can actually change them. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, just like we could access things with index in a string, we could access things with a index with a list. So if I wanted to, for example, just print the second item, I can say print me my list of 1, and I will get the 1, 2, 3. So we can access any item in the list by index, just like I was able to access any character in my string by index. So if I go to name and say print me location 1, I will also get the C. Okay, so I can access by index. So this is a similarity, access by index. You can do it in both a string and a list. If you try to access a location in the list that doesn't exist, you will get an index error, just like you did with a string. So here, error. If I say print me name of 4, which doesn't exist, this will produce an error. It says index out of range. Now, if I do the same thing with the list, I will also get the index out of range. So if I say my list of 5, which doesn't exist, I will also get the index out of range. So both these will give you an error. So when you're accessing elements, you need to make sure that the index exists. When you're accessing, you can do anything like here. For example, I created a list Z that contains 3, 7, 4, 2. So it contains 3, 7, 4, 2. The indices of it are 0, 1, 2, 3. And I can access by location. So I can say the sum is Z of 0 plus Z of 3. 0 is the 3, and the 3 contains 2. So this will give me 3 plus 2, which is 5. So if I print the sum, I get 5. Now, the nice thing also about lists is that you can access things backwards. And this is a little confusing at the beginning, so I want you to pay good attention to it. Here, the first index is always 0. So I go 0, 1, 2, 3. If I want to say I want to access the list backwards with negative indices, we don't start with 0. We can't start with 0 because 0 is already reserved for the first element. So if I want to access the last element, I can say -1. And -1 will give me that last index, and then -2, -3, and so on. So if I go to this list that I have here, and I want to access backwards, I'll say print me my list of -1. And so this will print me the last element, which is a C. Okay, so I can get that. Sorry, I'm accessing the list. So here the list, the last element is 1, 2, 3. I can also do that with the string. So if I say print me name of -1, that will give me the C. Okay, so here I got the C was the last character or last element. If I want to go through every element in my list, I can do it with a for loop or a while loop. Do you guys remember when we were talking about strings, we could also traverse every single character with a for loop? So they both are similar. So let's look at traversing. So traversing a list and a string. So for a string, I can say for, let's say, C in name, print me C, and maybe let's print a space after it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to print every letter in the name with a space after it. Okay, and then when we're done, let's print a new line. And let's do the same for the list. So I'll say for every I in my list, print me I, and let's print a space after it. Okay, and when we're done, we're going to print a new line just to separate them. And so I get here every character with a space, and I get every element with a space. So I can traverse a list using a regular for loop. Okay, so I can do that. Now, if I wanted to traverse a list and make changes to it, this regular for loop is not going to work. Why isn't it going to work? Because here what we're doing is we're creating a variable and we're setting it equal to some value. So let me kind of show you what's happening in RAM when we do that. So with my list, let's say here I have my list and it has banana and it has 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then I have my for loop for I in, whatever my list name is. So, and then here, let's say print I. What is happening here? What's happening here is that a variable called I is getting created in RAM. And what I is doing, it's going to the list and saying, okay, get me the first element, and it's banana. So it's copying the banana over. And then it's doing whatever you want to do with it. And then when it's done, it says, okay, I'm done. What's the next element? Well, it's 1, 2, 3. So now it gets the copy of 1, 2, 3. So if I try changing, here, if I said I equal to, let's say, happy, what I'm actually changing is this variable to happy, this I to happy. I am not touching the list. I'm not coming to the list and changing it. So when you're using this regular for loop, you cannot change content. And let's actually see that this is the case, that I'm not going to be able to change content. So here, let's try changing content inside the for loop. Won't work. So if I say for I in my list, and I'll say I equal to happy, and I'll say print me I, just to make sure that it is happy, right? And then when I'm done, I'll say print done changing, list is now, and let's see what the list is afterwards. Is it going to contain happy, or it's going to contain the original content? And we see that even though we see that I is happy inside, the list is still the same. It hasn't changed. Why hasn't it changed? Because I have been changing a local variable in RAM, not my list. Well, what if I do want to change the contents of the list? If you want to change the contents in the list, then you need an index. So somehow I need something here. I'll leave it blank for a second. And I want to say, I want to go to my list and say, I want to change, location 0 to be happy, or location I to be happy. Okay? So if I want to change the contents, I have to have an index. So that means this I here has to be an index. I'm going to just change the name to index so that we don't confuse it with the item above. So I want to change, I have to have access to an index. That means here I have to have a number that starts with 0, right? And it goes up to the length of the list minus 1. Now, can I get the length of the list? Yes. Just like I was able to get the length of a string, okay, I can also get the length of a list. So I can come here and say in range, and then I can say my list, length of my list. What am I doing? I'm grabbing the length of the list, which in my case is 2, and saying, give me all the numbers in the range from 0 up to that number, not including that number. So here, because my list only contains 2 numbers, range will give me the numbers from 0 up to 1. Okay, so always gives us this number, but minus 1. Now let's try that, see if this is going to work, and then let's print done changing a second time, and let's see what it is right now after we changed it. And here we see that it actually changed. So when you're traversing a list, for traversing a list, you can just use the regular for here that goes through every single item in the list. But if you want to change the contents, you have to use, an index. You have to have access to an index in order to be able to change the contents in a list.